In this episode, we're going to take a look at how we can construct this rust material. If you look at this one, I created this gizmo in another episode. I'm going to link into it in the video description as well. Going in here, we can see this is essentially the rust material that we have. And this is the operations we can do here. We have this tiled material in the bottom, and this is the part here of this tiled material. This is a similar gizmo like the tree planar, except this is a 2D manifolds driving this one. So I could just swap out going in here and swap the base color, and this will create then a 3D material instead of the 2D. I'm gonna swap this back here and take a look here. So as you can see here, I have the same fashion that we have done before. I've exposed out all of this that lives in this gizmo here into the main material, as you can see here. And if I would start here to scale this material, you can see here we have something happening, but we also have a secondary layer that I created here, and we're gonna look at this here as well. If I now collapse this gizmo group here in the interface, you can see here we get more stuff here. So we have here in the bottom here, we have a color HSV. So I can go in here, for example, on this tiled that I'm gonna create a separate episode how to create this tiled material. We have here, we can go in and go hue shift and all of that, saturation, and we have value. And I'm gonna show where this one comes into play here. I'm first gonna disable something here. So I have add secondary rust here. I'm just gonna disable this one first off. So now we're essentially seeing just the properties for the base tileable that we apply here. So this one, the base color HSV, is essentially this one here, this node here. I inserted this one. So this stream here, for example, you can see here goes col, goes up here, and then you can follow it from left to right. And this is the output of the material. So we have here within this backdrop here, this is essentially everything that is related to the base material that is driven by this tileable here. So I have HSV overrides, we have base specular, and that's just a float, essentially float value that's coming in. We also have here for the specular roughness, the spec R here, we have the base spec R levels and contrast operation that we can create here on top. In the interface, they are essentially here and contrast. I have normal strengths. I am not using normal maps in my material at the moment. This material, we can disregard it. I'm using displacement and bump. And now, for example, here, we want to add this secondary rust. So what I did here is to have a secondary rust that is a procedural base driven. And this is essentially here. This is the color for the rust. And I have a mask down here that is essentially enabling this one. So you see here this add secondary rust. So when I take this slider here and drag it down here, you see this secondary rust disappears. And this node here is actually this node here. So I'm using a multiply on top of a procedural rust pattern here. So let's take a look at this rust pattern, what this is doing. And this is my secondary rust mask. And what I've done here is to create here essentially a simple gizmo. It's just a cloud, a contrast operation, and then I clamp it. So I have created here cloud contrast node that I call this one. If I go in here and say the cloud size, I have the roughness, but then I also have in the same node here a contrast operation and a contrast pivot. And this can then in turn control the size of this secondary rust. Whatever is white can be this one. And I'm using this secondary rust slider here to multiply, to add or remove this. And you can see here, this multiply node is then feeding into all streams here. That's essentially overriding what's already coming from this base rust here. And this is then essentially driven here by the color mainly. And I have some operations here for secondary specular breakup. But the main bulk of it is this mask and this color here. So let's take a look at this outside here now. If I look here at my rust and I enable my rust again here, add secondary rust, you can see here now I made the blotches bigger, and I can go in here and say this size here, the roughness, the contrast, the pivot of it, and so forth. And this is the color operation here. So I have a secondary pattern that is also a cloud that you can say go in here and say essentially override the color within these blotches here, and these two colors is the main colors, and then you can also go into roughness. You can see here some of it is actually also feeding into the bump. I'm doing a bump operation down here. Let's take a look here. So we have this incoming rust here, and it's leveled here at the moment, so I can go in here and change that a bit, and I'm multiplying it with this raise and lower bump. This is essentially just a way to I'm multiplying here, and what I did here, I wanted a single slider controlling just this level. So what I took here was to take this vector here, but I just wanted to expose this top red here. Instead of just having essentially red as the output, I piped this red into a vector combine because I wanted to have a monochromatic scale here, essentially. It wouldn't have made any difference. It's more a visual thing. I like to have this one like monochromatic. Otherwise it would have looked like this, and yeah, I don't like that. So I'm taking this red channel, piping it into red, green, and blue. Then I'm using another scale node here, set to 1 for essentially alpha. So this one would raise and lower the value, the incoming value here, because I'm multiplying whatever value comes in here, I'm multiplying it here. This one is tuned to be around 0.5. If you want to raise the incoming value, you increase this one here up a bit. So here, if I reset it to 0 or 1, essentially, this one would be whatever comes in here. If you want to increase it so it looks like it's going up, you take this up. If you want to decrease it, you take it down. And let's take a look here, and this is what we have at the moment. We have the incoming color value that are run through a color to scalar operation, and I'm desaturated. So here I'm taking whatever colors we have here. I'm using a color to scalar operation to put this into scalar values, and then I'm just desaturating this so it becomes grayscale, and then I'm using this in various operations here. For example, I have the specular roughness, and this is the base value of the specular roughness. I'm using parts of this on top to give the specular roughness some additional breakup here. I'm having a contrast operation for the specular breakup, and then I'm applying it here using the mask. We also have here, the bump. Looking here at the outside again, and this is what we get. Now let's go back here and see here what we have. I can tweak the values here for the rust, the base rust. Go into saturation, value, and then we have the base specular values. If you want to have it more or less of the spec contribution for this, the base, the levels for specular, and the contrast operation. You can see it mainly there on the grazing angles. When I do something, we can fade the bump for the base material, essentially the tile driven. And then when we come to add secondary rust here, this is where all of these sliders here takes place. So we can do now the size, the color, and then we have some HSV grade for the same here if you want to grade this one independently, and do some overrides from what you did there, the same as you have for the base color. And then you have the secondary rust specular value. You can see here and when I crank this up, I guess more here where you have these ones, and then you can go in and tweak essentially the roughness for the same there. And this is the raise and lower bump. We have some global overrides here as well. Towards the bottom you have a few global specular roughness, global HSV. That's something that I created here as well. I'm gonna upload this to my Gumroad and you can download it, because in the next episode we're gonna finalize the layer materials using this rust material. Okay.